Pete had never disobeyed a single command in 12 years, but now he stood like a mountain of stubborn flesh and fur, blocking the cellar door with a determination that seemed to burn in his dark eyes. No amount of pulling, pushing, or even the promise of fresh oats could move him an inch. Silas Whitmore wiped the sweat from his forehead, staring at the burrow that had become his greatest mystery. 3 weeks had passed since his father's funeral, and Pete had spent every single day and night in this exact spot. The animal barely ate, barely slept, just stood guard like some four-legged sentinel protecting secrets Silas never knew existed. The cellar door behind Pete was old and weathered, painted green years ago but now chipped and faded. Silas had seen it 1,000 times growing up on this ranch, but never once had his father allowed him near it. "Nothing down there but old tools and rat poison," the old man would say whenever young Silas got curious. But if it was just tools and poison, why had his father kept 3 heavy locks on that door? Silas approached slowly, his boots crunching on the dry grass. Pete's ears flattened against his head, and a low growl rumbled from his throat. A growl from an animal that had never shown aggression to anyone, ever. "Easy, boy," Silas whispered, extending his hand. "It's just me." But Pete stepped sideways, pressing his body even tighter against the door. His nostrils flared, and his eyes held something Silas had never seen before. Fear, not of Silas, but of something else. Something that made the loyal animal willing to defy his master for the first time in his life. The ranch hands had started talking. Old Miguel crossed himself every time he walked past the cellar. Young Tommy refused to work anywhere near the barn after sunset. Even Sarah, who'd been bringing meals to the ranch for 20 years, now left the food at the main gate instead of walking to the house. Silas tried one more time, grabbing Pete's halter and pulling with all his strength. The burro didn't budge. Instead, he turned his head and looked directly into Silas's eyes. In that moment, Silas saw something that made his blood run cold. Pete wasn't just guarding the door. He was protecting Silas from whatever was behind it. But as the sun began to set and shadows stretched across the ranch, Silas heard something that changed everything. A sound so faint he almost missed it, coming from behind that locked door. A sound that shouldn't exist if his father had been telling the truth all those years. Someone was knocking back. The knocking came again. 3 deliberate taps, then silence. Silas pressed his ear against the weathered wood, his heart hammering against his ribs. Pete shifted nervously beside him but didn't move away from the door. Silas stepped back, his mind racing. His father had been dead for 3 weeks. The ranch had been empty except for him and the workers. Nobody else had keys to the property, and certainly nobody had access to whatever lay beneath this cellar door. He examined the 3 locks more carefully in the fading light. They weren't just old, they were ancient. Heavy iron mechanisms that looked like they belonged in a prison rather than a ranch cellar. The metal was worn smooth in places, as if they'd been opened and closed countless times over the years. But when had his father done that? Silas had lived on this ranch for the first 18 years of his life, then visited regularly after moving to town. He'd never once seen his father go near this door. Never caught him carrying food or supplies in this direction. Yet someone had been opening these locks regularly enough to wear them smooth. Pete suddenly tensed, his ears swiveling toward the door. The knocking resumed, more urgent this time. 5 quick raps, then 3 slow ones, then 5 quick raps again. It wasn't random. It was a pattern, a signal. Silas's blood turned to ice water. Someone down there knew he was listening. He ran to the main house, his legs shaking with each step. In his father's study, he tore through desk drawers, searching for anything that might explain what he'd discovered. Behind a photograph of his mother, he found a small brass key. It was warm to the touch, as if it had been handled recently. When he returned to the cellar, Pete was pacing back and forth in front of the door, agitated in a way Silas had never seen. The burro's eyes were wide with what looked like panic, and he kept pawing at the ground with his front hooves. Silas held up the brass key, and Pete went completely still. Then, to Silas's amazement, the animal slowly stepped aside. Not away from the door, but just enough to allow access to the locks. Pete's dark eyes never left Silas's face, and in them was a message as clear as spoken words. Be careful. The first lock opened with a soft click. The second one resisted, but finally gave way with a rusty groan. As Silas reached for the third lock, Pete made a sound he'd never heard before. A low, mournful wail that seemed to come from the animal's very soul. The brass key slid into the final lock. Silas turned it slowly, feeling decades of rust and time give way. The lock fell open with a heavy thud that echoed in the twilight silence. Behind the door, footsteps approached. Slow, shuffling steps climbing what sounded like wooden stairs, getting closer with each passing second. Someone was coming up to meet him. The footsteps stopped just on the other side of the door. Silas could hear breathing, slow, labored, but definitely human. His hand trembled as he reached for the door handle, Pete watching every movement with those knowing eyes. The door creaked open, revealing wooden steps descending into darkness. But at the top of those steps stood a figure that made Silas's world crumble and rebuild itself in the span of a heartbeat. His mother. Ruth Whitmore looked exactly as she had 27 years ago, the day she'd supposedly died in that carriage accident. The same gentle brown eyes, the same graying hair pulled back in a simple bun, the same calloused hands that had braided his hair and mended his clothes. The only difference was the pale, hollow look of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in decades. "Hello, Silas," she said softly, her voice exactly as he remembered it. "I've been waiting for you to find me." Silas couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what his eyes were telling him. His mother, dead for 27 years, stood before him as real as the ground beneath his feet. "Mama." The word came out like a prayer, broken and desperate. Ruth smiled, but it was a sad smile filled with years of sorrow. "Your father told you I died, didn't he?" "Told everyone I died. But I've been right here, Silas, right underneath your feet all these years." Pete moved closer to Ruth, nuzzling against her weathered dress like he'd done it 1,000 times before. She scratched behind his ears with the familiarity of old friendship. "Pete's been my only companion," she continued. "Your father brought him down to see me every week, brought me food, books, news about you growing up. But he made me promise to stay hidden, made me swear I'd never try to contact you." Silas finally found his voice. "But why? Why would he do that? Why would he tell me you were dead?" Ruth's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Because I killed a man, Silas. And not just any man. I killed the sheriff's brother in self-defense, but nobody would have believed me. Your father had a choice. Let me hang for murder, or hide me away and tell the world I died in an accident." The revelation hit Silas like a physical blow. Everything he'd believed about his family, his childhood, his father's stern demeanor, all of it had been built on this massive lie. "He buried an empty coffin," Ruth continued, "held a funeral, grieved publicly while secretly building this cellar to keep me safe. He spent 27 years living two lives, the widowed rancher everyone saw, and the devoted husband who came down here every evening to sit with his wife." Silas looked around the underground space for the first time. It wasn't a cellar at all, but a complete living area. A bed, a small kitchen, shelves lined with books, even a rocking chair by a tiny fireplace. His father had built his mother an entire hidden world. "When Pete stopped coming down to see me 3 weeks ago, I knew your father was gone," Ruth said quietly. "That loyal animal has been standing guard ever since, waiting for you to be ready to learn the truth." But as touching as this reunion was, Silas noticed something that filled him with new dread. On the table behind his mother sat a stack of wanted posters, fresh ones, and at the top of the pile was a drawing of a woman who looked exactly like Ruth Whitmore. After 27 years, someone was still hunting for his supposedly dead mother. Silas picked up the wanted poster with shaking hands. The reward had increased to $5,000, more money than most people saw in a lifetime. Below the sketch, in bold letters, it read, "Ruth Whitmore, wanted for murder, believed to be hiding in Western territories, armed and extremely dangerous." "They never stopped looking," Ruth said, noticing his expression. "The sheriff's family has money, influence. They've kept this bounty active for nearly 3 decades, convinced I'm still alive somewhere." Silas studied his mother's face, trying to reconcile the woman before him with the dangerous criminal described on the poster. "Tell me what really happened that night." Ruth sat heavily in her rocking chair, Pete positioning himself protectively beside her. Sheriff Hawkins' brother Caleb had been harassing women in town for months. Nobody dared speak against him because of who his brother was. But when he cornered me in the general store that evening, her voice trailed off and she stared at her hands. "He tore my dress, said things no woman should have to hear. When I tried to leave, he grabbed me, pushed me against the wall. There was a knife on the counter, the store owner's carving knife. When Caleb pressed himself against me, I reached for it." The silence stretched between them, heavy with decades of buried pain. It happened so fast, Ruth continued. One moment he was forcing himself on me, the next he was on the floor bleeding. I ran home and told your father everything. He took one look at me, at my torn dress, the bruises, and knew exactly what had happened. Silas felt rage building in his chest, not at his mother, but at a system that would have punished her for defending herself. Your father rode into town that same night, Ruth said. Found Caleb's body, saw the blood, the knife, but he also saw something else. Caleb's friends were already spinning a different story, saying I'd lured him there, that I'd attacked him without provocation. They claimed he was trying to help me when I stabbed him, so Papa made the choice to hide you. He said he'd rather live with me in secret than watch me hang for defending my honor. That night he came home and told me Ruth Whitmore had to die, that if anyone came looking they'd find a grieving widow in an empty grave. Silas was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Then a terrible thought occurred to him. Mama, if these posters are fresh, someone knows you're still alive. Ruth nodded grimly. 3 days before your father died, a man came to the ranch asking questions, claimed to be a traveling merchant, but your father recognized him. Caleb Hawkins' nephew, all grown up and carrying on the family obsession. Pete suddenly lifted his head, ears swiveling toward the cellar entrance. From somewhere above came the sound of horses approaching the ranch house. Ruth went pale. They've found me. If you were Silas, what would you do? Try to run with your mother and risk exposing her secret forever, or stay and fight men who've been hunting her for 27 years? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you'd choose, because what Silas decided next would determine whether his mother lived to see another sunrise. Silas moved quickly, helping his mother blow out the oil lamps that lit her underground home. Above them, bootsteps echoed across the ranch house porch, followed by the sound of his front door being kicked in. Ruth Whitmore, a voice called out, deep and commanding. We know you're here. Come out peaceful, and we won't burn this place to the ground. Pete pressed himself against Ruth's legs, trembling but silent. The burro seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, with an intelligence that went beyond animal instinct. Silas could hear them moving through his house, overturning furniture, smashing dishes. At least 3 men, maybe more. Heavy boots, spurs jangling, the unmistakable sound of weapons being drawn. 27 years we've been hunting you, woman, the same voice shouted. But we found the old man's journal before he died, found out where he really went every night, found out about his little evening walks to the barn. Ruth closed her eyes in despair. Your father kept a journal. I begged him not to, but he said he needed to record the truth somewhere, in case something happened to him. The footsteps moved outside, circling the house like wolves. Lantern light flickered through the small window wells of the cellar, casting dancing shadows on the walls. We saw the burro, Ruth, another voice called out, younger but just as cruel. That mangy animal led us right to you. Been watching this place for days, waiting for someone to open that cellar door. Silas felt sick. Pete hadn't been protecting his mother. He'd been trying to keep everyone away because somehow, the loyal animal had sensed they were being watched. There, the first voice again, much closer now. Fresh scratches on these locks. She's down there, boys. Bootsteps approached the cellar entrance. Through the crack under the door, Silas could see lamplight growing brighter. Ruth grabbed her son's arm. There's another way out, she whispered urgently. Your father dug a tunnel that leads to the creek bed. But Silas, if they catch me, they'll hang me tonight. No trial, no questions. The Hawkins family doesn't believe in legal justice. Above them, someone was examining the door. These locks are warm. Been opened recent. Stand back, boys. The sound of a rifle being cocked echoed through the night air. Silas made his decision. He grabbed his mother's hand and Pete's halter, leading them quickly toward the back of the cellar. Behind a false wall, just as Ruth had said, was a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. Go, he whispered to his mother. I'll hold them off as long as I can. But Ruth shook her head. Not without you. I won't lose my son the same day I get him back. The cellar door exploded inward, splinters of wood flying everywhere. Lamplight flooded the space, followed by 3 armed men. The leader was tall and lean, with the cold eyes of someone who'd spent decades nursing a grudge. Well, well, he said, lowering his rifle slightly. Ruth Whitmore, I presume. You look exactly like your wanted poster. But as the men advanced into the cellar, Pete did something unexpected. The burro charged forward with a fury that seemed to come from 27 years of protective instinct. He knocked the leader backwards, sending his rifle flying and his lamp crashing to the ground. In the chaos that followed, with men shouting and Pete braying like a wild animal, neither Silas nor Ruth saw the fourth man who'd been waiting silently in the tunnel behind them. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. A hand clamped over Ruth's mouth just as she was about to scream, but the hand that covered Ruth's mouth was gentle, and the voice that whispered in her ear was one she recognized from years ago. "Easy, Ruth. It's me, Doc Henley." Dr. Samuel Henley had been the town physician when Ruth disappeared 27 years ago. He was the one who'd examined her torn dress and bruises that night, the one who'd written the false death certificate that helped Thomas Whitmore stage his wife's funeral. "I've been watching your place for weeks, Silas," Doc whispered, as the chaos continued in the main cellar. "Knew something was wrong when Pete started acting strange. Your father asked me to look after Ruth if anything ever happened to him." The three bounty hunters were still struggling with Pete, who seemed determined to fight all of them at once. The burro's fury was magnificent and terrible, years of protective instinct unleashed in a storm of hooves and teeth. "This way," Doc urged, guiding Ruth and Silas deeper into the tunnel. "I've got horses waiting by the creek." But as they crawled through the narrow space, Silas could hear the fight above ending badly. Pete's brave sounds grew weaker, then stopped altogether. A gunshot echoed through the tunnel, followed by cruel laughter. "That's what happens to animals that protect murderers," one of the men shouted. Ruth stopped crawling, tears streaming down her face. "They killed him. They killed Pete." "Ruth, we have to keep moving," Doc urged. "Pete died protecting you. Don't let his sacrifice be meaningless." They emerged from the tunnel near the creek, where Doc had indeed left 3 horses saddled and ready. But as they mounted up, the sound of hooves approached from multiple directions. The bounty hunters had brought more men than just the 3 who'd entered the cellar. "Spread out," the leader's voice carried across the night. "They can't have gone far. $5,000 says we don't let them reach the county line." Doc led them along the creek bed, using the water to muffle their horses' hoofbeats. But even in the moonlight, Silas could see riders on both sides of the creek, systematically searching every possible hiding spot. "There's an old mine shaft about 2 miles upstream," Doc said quietly. "Your father and I used to prospect there as boys. If we can reach it, we can hide until they give up the search." But as they rode deeper into the darkness, Ruth suddenly pulled her horse to a stop. "No," she said firmly. "I won't spend the rest of my life running. I won't hide in another hole in the ground while good people die protecting me." She turned her horse around, facing the direction they'd come from. "Those men killed Pete. They destroyed your father's house, Silas. They're going to keep hunting until someone stops them." "Mama, what are you saying?" Ruth's eyes held a determination Silas had never seen before. "I'm saying it's time for Ruth Whitmore to stop being a victim." But before anyone could stop her, she spurred her horse into a gallop, riding straight back toward the men who wanted her dead. And behind her, the sound of gunfire erupted across the peaceful ranch land. Silas and Doc raced after Ruth, but she had a head start and 27 years of rage driving her forward. She rode like someone who'd finally decided that death on her feet was better than life on her knees. The bounty hunters saw her coming. In the moonlight, her gray hair flying behind her like a banner, she looked like some avenging spirit risen from the grave they thought they'd put her in decades ago. "There she is," the leader shouted. "Take her alive if you can, dead if you can't." But Ruth wasn't charging blindly. As she approached the ranch house, she veered toward the barn where her husband had kept his hunting rifles. The same barn where Pete had died protecting her secret. Gunshots erupted around her as she dismounted and dove through the barn door. Bullets splintered wood and shattered glass. But Ruth moved with the desperate grace of someone who had nothing left to lose. Inside the barn, she found what she was looking for. Thomas's old rifle, the one he'd taught her to shoot when they were newlyweds, the one she'd used to hunt deer and protect their livestock from wolves. The bounty hunters surrounded the barn, calling for her surrender. But Ruth had spent 27 years thinking about this moment, imagining what she'd say if she ever faced the men who'd destroyed her life. "You want Ruth Whitmore?" she called out, her voice carrying across the night air. "Then come and get her." The first man through the barn door was the leader, confident in his decades of hunting experience. But Ruth had advantages he didn't expect. She knew every board, every beam, every shadow in that barn. She'd spent countless hours there as a young wife, helping Thomas with the animals. Her first shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle flying. Her second shot shattered the lantern in his hand, plunging the barn into darkness. "She's just one woman," another bounty hunter shouted from outside. "Rush her!" But as two more men charged through the door, they found themselves facing not just Ruth, but Silas and Doc Henley, who'd arrived just in time to turn the tide. The fight was brutal but brief. Years of anger and frustration boiled over in a storm of gunfire and desperation. When the smoke cleared and the echoes died away, 3 bounty hunters lay motionless in the dirt. But the victory came with a terrible cost. Doc Henley sat propped against the barn wall, blood spreading across his chest from a bullet meant for Ruth. "Doc!" Ruth knelt beside him, pressing her hands against the wound. He smiled weakly. "Always said I'd die helping someone. Just thought it'd be in childbirth, not a gunfight." "You're not dying," Ruth said fiercely. "I won't let you." But Doc's breathing was growing shallow. "Ruth, in my medical bag, there's a letter. Written it years ago, just in case. It's the truth about what Caleb Hawkins did to you. Everything I saw, everything I treated. Multiple witnesses signed it." Silas found the letter, sealed and yellowed with age. "This could clear your name, Mama." Doc nodded weakly. "Sheriff Hawkins died 5 years ago. His successor, decent man, fair man. He'll listen to the truth." As dawn broke over the Whitmore ranch, painting the sky in shades of hope and redemption, Ruth finally understood that her long nightmare might be ending. But as she held the letter that could restore her life, she realized something else. The most important witness to her innocence was lying wounded in her arms, and whether he lived or died would determine if justice finally found its way to the Whitmore ranch. Doc Henley lived. Ruth's desperate efforts to stop the bleeding, combined with Silas's quick ride to fetch help from town, saved the physician's life. But more importantly, Doc's survival meant that Ruth finally had a living witness to corroborate the letter he'd written years ago. The new sheriff, William Crawford, was everything Doc had promised, a fair man who believed in justice over vengeance. When he read Doc's detailed account of Ruth's injuries from that night 27 years ago, when he saw the sworn statements from townspeople who'd witnessed Caleb Hawkins' pattern of harassment, he knew he was looking at the truth. The bounty hunters who'd died at the ranch were revealed to be Caleb's nephews and cousins, men who'd spent their lives nursing a family grudge rather than seeking real justice. Their leader carried papers showing they'd never been legally authorized to hunt Ruth. They were vigilantes driven by hatred, not lawmen serving justice. Within a week, all charges against Ruth Whitmore were officially dropped. The woman who'd been declared dead 27 years ago was legally alive again, free to walk in sunlight without fear. But freedom came with grief. Pete was buried beside the barn he'd died defending, his grave marked with a simple stone that read, "Loyal to the end." Ruth visited that grave every morning, bringing fresh oats she'd never again see him eat. Doc Henley recovered fully, though he carried a scar from the bullet that had nearly ended his life. "Some scars tell the best stories," he told Ruth with a smile. "And this one tells the story of how justice finally came home." Silas struggled with anger toward his father for keeping such a massive secret, but understanding came slowly. Thomas Whitmore had made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, sacrificing his own happiness to keep his wife alive. In the end, Silas realized love sometimes demanded the hardest sacrifices. Ruth chose to stay on the ranch. After 27 years underground, she couldn't get enough of sunlight, of wind on her face, of the simple freedom to walk wherever she pleased. She turned the hidden cellar into a root cellar for storing vegetables, finally giving it the innocent purpose Thomas had always claimed it had. The town welcomed her back slowly at first, then with growing warmth as people learned the truth of what had happened. The women especially rallied around her, understanding that Ruth's story could have been any of their stories in a world where powerful men faced few consequences for their actions. She never remarried, though she lived 30 more years on the ranch. Silas brought his children to visit their grandmother, and Ruth filled their heads with stories of their grandfather's courage and a burro named Pete, who'd been the most loyal friend anyone could ask for. When Ruth finally passed, peacefully in her sleep at age 84, the whole town came to her funeral. She was buried beside Thomas, with Pete's grave visible from her headstone. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a truth so powerful it'll stay with you long after the last word. Click on the video now.
A canine dog stopped a school bus. Everyone was shocked when they discovered the reason. He wasn't running. He wasn't lost. He was standing, right in front of a moving school bus, barking like his life depended on it. A German shepherd, alone on a foggy road, refusing to let the wheels move another inch. Where did he come from? What was he trying to stop? And how did he know something was terribly wrong beneath that bus before anyone else did? Stick around. The truth will leave you breathless. Aspen Hills, Colorado, woke in a hush that felt heavier than silence. It was early October, and the town was wrapped in a quilt of silver fog, clinging to the pine trees like forgotten breath. The morning sun struggled to rise, casting a muted glow over the two-lane Route 17 that snaked its way between farmland, forest, and sleepy houses with sagging porches and coffee steam curling from cracked windows. School bus number 12 rolled carefully along that winding road, its headlights catching flecks of mist and dewdrops. Behind the wheel sat Sam Jennings, a 63-year-old man built like an old oak, sturdy, grounded, and weathered by time. His hair was a thick wave of silver tucked beneath a brown wool cap, and his faded flannel shirt bore the soft creases of decades on early morning routes. He had the calm of a man who knew his roads, his schedule, and his kids. For over 30 years, Sam had driven this bus, and for the last 2 he'd done it with his granddaughter in tow. Eliza Jennings, 11, sat in the third row back, her knees pulled up on the seat and her chin resting atop them. Her brown hair peeked from under a hoodie, her phone cradled loosely in her hand. 2 years ago, she'd been all noise and giggles. Now she was quiet, a thoughtful girl whose emotions simmered behind wide, curious eyes. After her parents died in a car accident, Sam had taken her in. They didn't talk much on mornings like this. Some bonds didn't need words. The bus hummed steadily through the fog, stopping here and there to pick up sleepy children in rain boots and backpacks. Mia Caldwell, Eliza's best friend, had boarded a few stops back. She was small for her age, but carried herself like a journalist in training, always watching, always sketching, always full of questions. She waved to Eliza with a soft smile before taking her usual window seat. "Fog's heavy this morning," Sam muttered to himself as he turned onto the forested stretch near Pine Ridge. He adjusted the defroster and leaned forward slightly, peering through the mist. Then, a flash of movement. He saw it before he fully registered it. A shadow leapt from the trees, low and fast, and landed square in the road ahead. Sam's reflexes kicked in. His foot slammed the brake pedal and the bus jolted. Children gasped, bags slid from laps, and a pencil rolled down the aisle. The wheels screeched, and the vehicle came to a halt barely 20 feet from the shape now frozen in the headlights. It was a dog. Tall, lean, powerful, a German shepherd soaked to the bone, its fur clinging in tufts to its body. Black and tan, with bright amber eyes locked directly onto the windshield. Its tail was stiff, its ears pointed forward in sharp alertness. Then it began to bark, loud, deep, and deliberate. Not a sound of fear, but of urgency. Children began to chatter nervously. "Where'd that come from?" someone said. "Is it going to bite us?" "It's barking at the bus." Eliza, her heart thumping with a strange curiosity, lifted her phone and began recording without a word. She zoomed in on the dog, which had now taken several slow steps forward, and sat down directly in front of the bus. Its barking hadn't stopped. Mia leaned toward her. "Send it to my mom," she whispered. "She'll want this." Eliza didn't answer but hit share and sent the video to Mia's mother, Rachel Caldwell, who ran a small local newsletter and occasionally wrote wildlife pieces for regional papers. Sam frowned and shifted the gear into park. The fog swirled gently past the windshield. The dog was unmoving, holding its ground like it belonged there. "What on earth?" he muttered. He grabbed his coat from the hook beside the door and stepped down onto the damp gravel road. Cold air slapped his cheeks. He adjusted his cap and took a few steps forward, stopping just short of the bumper. He raised his voice gently but firmly. "All right now, fella. You had your moment. Go on, move along." The dog didn't move. It barked again, louder this time. Then it turned its head slightly toward the bus's side, as if pointing. Sam blinked. "Go on now," he said again, waving a hand. The dog stood, took 2 steps toward him, then sat again. Its eyes didn't blink, and the fog around them seemed to thicken. The fog seemed to thicken with each passing breath, wrapping Route 17 in a veil of uncertainty. Sam Jennings remained standing just beyond the front bumper, staring down at the German shepherd that refused to budge. The dog's amber eyes held a steady intelligence, its barks now spaced with calculated growls. The air smelled of wet earth and old pine, and for a moment, Sam forgot the chill creeping through his boots. The dog wasn't there to scare. It was trying to say something. Behind him, the bus door hissed open. Grandpa Eliza's voice floated out cautious but firm. "What's it doing?" Sam turned halfway. "He won't move, just sitting there, barking like he owns the road." "I think he's trying to tell us something," Eliza murmured, stepping down onto the pavement, ignoring the slight tug of fear in her stomach. A few other students peered through the windows. Some pressed their faces to the glass. Eliza's best friend, Mia, followed closely, clutching her sketch pad to her chest. "My mom says dogs can sense danger before we do," she whispered. Sam hesitated for a second, then sighed. "All right," he called back to the kids still on board. "Everybody off the bus. Line up by the fence. Eliza, Mia, you help keep them together." The children began to file out, rubbing their arms in the morning cold, some whispering excitedly about the dog, others glancing nervously toward the trees. They formed a loose line near the shoulder of the road just beyond the mist-drenched grass. As Sam moved to usher the last few kids out, the dog barked again, loud and sharp. Then it turned and sprinted to the side of the bus, claws scraping on wet gravel, and began scratching furiously beneath the rear wheel arch. It barked once more, turned to look at the crowd, then resumed digging and scraping at the side panel. "That's odd," Sam muttered, walking around to the back. Eliza followed, phone in hand. "It's like he's trying to dig something out," she said. The dog, soaked now fur clinging to its strong frame, barked at them both and scratched harder, whimpering between each sweep of his paw. A rumble of tires broke through the stillness. A dark blue SUV emerged from the mist, flashing red and blue lights low and steady on the dash. It pulled up behind the bus. The driver's door opened and a tall man stepped out. Deputy Mark Delgado was a man who wore authority like a second skin built broad with a slow, deliberate stride. His short black hair was slightly disheveled, and his steel-gray eyes scanned the scene before him. He wore a thick, tan sheriff's jacket and black tactical boots, a radio clipped to his shoulder. At 42, Mark had seen more than most wanted to, but there was still something warm in the way he nodded at Sam. "Morning, Sam. Got a call something was blocking your route." Sam pointed to the dog. "More like someone." Mark's gaze fell on the dog. His brows furrowed. "Is that... no... wait." The dog turned sharply at the sound of Mark's voice. It barked once, then trotted toward him, tail stiff but not aggressive. It sat at Mark's feet. Mark knelt slowly, hand extended. "I'll be damned." Ranger. The dog lifted a paw and pressed it into Mark's hand, whining softly. Sam blinked. "You know him?" Mark nodded, rubbing the dog's head. "Yeah. This is Ranger. He was my partner in Denver, one of the best canines I've ever worked with. Smart, fast, fearless. But he got pulled off duty after refusing to obey during a drug raid. Saved a toddler instead of going after the suspect." Command didn't like that, called it insubordination. He looked up, voice hardening slightly. I called it being human. Sam watched as Ranger barked again and ran to the back of the bus, scratching once more at the lower panel. He's been doing that since he got here. He jumped out of nowhere and just started this. Eliza stepped forward. He's not trying to hurt anyone. He's trying to get someone to see something. Mark's jaw tightened. He's alerting to something, all right. And I've learned to trust him. The bus now stood empty except for bags and forgotten jackets. The kids were quiet, sensing the shift in mood. Ranger barked once more, insistent. Mark stood up and turned to Sam. I'm going to check underneath. Be my guest. Sam nodded, worry beginning to line his face. Meanwhile, across the road, Eliza had pulled out her phone again. She ducked behind a nearby stump and began searching the name Ranger K9 Denver. It took only seconds for the first articles to load. K9 hero retired after defying orders, the dog that chose a baby over protocol. She scrolled through images. There he was, same intense eyes, same black and tan coat. She felt a swell of anger rise in her chest. How could they throw away a dog like that? A dog who saved a child? Find anything? Mia asked, appearing beside her. Eliza nodded slowly. He's not dangerous. He's a hero. Back by the bus, Mark was on the ground now, flashlight in hand. Ranger stood beside him like a sentinel, ears alert, body still. Mark peered under the chassis, then leaned back, his expression unreadable. Sam, he said, voice low. I think we've got something. I'm not saying what I think it is, but you need to call this in. Sam's mouth went dry. A threat Mark didn't answer directly. Just call it in. As Sam stepped away to grab his radio, Ranger turned and looked directly at Eliza. Their eyes met. And in that moment, she didn't see a dangerous animal. She saw someone no one had listened to. Yet. Mark Delgado lay half beneath the rear of the bus, his flashlight casting a steady white beam over the damp, rust-touched undercarriage. Beside him, Ranger stood like a statue. His fur soaked his breath, visible in the cold air, eyes sharp and locked on the shadows beneath the vehicle. The air around Route 17 had stilled the fog hanging thick and low like held breath. Sam Jennings stood nearby, clutching his radio tighter than he realized. His knuckles had gone white. You see anything? Mark's voice came from under the chassis, measured and quiet. Yeah, he said. I see something all right. There was a pause, then the sound of metal scraping as Mark slowly slid out. He sat upright, brushing dirt from his sleeves, his jaw set. There's a device attached to the fuel tank. Compact, black casing, wires taped down, and something else. It's got a small lens on the front. A camera. Could be transmitting. Sam's stomach dropped. You're saying someone's watching this? Mark nodded, rising to his feet. Looks like it. I'm not jumping to conclusions, but I've seen setups like this before. We need to treat this like the real thing. Eliza, standing just a few steps away, slowly lowered her phone. She had been recording since Ranger had started barking at the back wheel. Her eyes wide and steady, flicked from the bus to Mark. So, if I was filming, someone might have seen me, she asked, her voice soft. Mark turned to her, tone gentler. It's possible, kiddo. Might have picked up motion or heat and activated a feed. Good instincts stopping the camera. Eliza swallowed, then locked the phone and slid it into her hoodie pocket. Sam brought the radio to his lips, voice taut. Dispatch, this is Bus 12 on Route 17. We've located a suspicious device on the undercarriage. Possible explosive includes a camera. Request immediate bomb squad response and support. We're initiating evacuation now. Confirmed Bus 12, came the voice from dispatch. EOD team is being dispatched from the state office. ETA 40 minutes. Stay in position and evacuate all non-essential personnel. Sam exhaled sharply. Eliza, he said, turning. get the others up to the old ranger station clearing. You and Mia keep them together." Eliza nodded and ran back toward the gathered students. "All right, guys, listen up. We're going up that trail to the old ranger station. Stay close together, no wandering." Mia trailed behind, nervously hugging her sketch pad. "Why that place?" "It's far enough," Eliza said, "and safer than standing here." As the children followed in a thin, whispering line, the forest swallowed them. Only the fog held steady, curling around the trees like ancient breath. Meanwhile, a green SUV sped up to the scene and braked hard behind the bus. Out stepped Principal Dana Moore, tall, neatly dressed in a navy pantsuit with practical shoes and a clipboard gripped in one hand. Her posture was upright, shoulders stiff, her face carefully composed beneath layers of tension. Dana was in her early 50s, a former English teacher who had grown into her role with authority and formality. She didn't like surprises, and especially didn't like dogs on school property. "What on earth is happening?" she demanded, walking briskly toward Sam and Mark. Sam nodded toward the bus. "Device under the chassis." Mark found it. Dana paled slightly, but her tone stayed firm. "A bomb. We're treating it like one Mark said, and Ranger's the reason we stopped. If he hadn't jumped in, this bus would have rolled right into school property." Her eyes shifted toward the German Shepherd. Ranger stood silently by the front wheel watching them, ears pricked and posture alert. Dana's lips pressed into a thin line. "That dog is a safety risk," she said quietly. "School policy is clear, no animals near campus." "He just saved 15 kids," Mark replied sharply. "Including yours." Dana blinked. "My daughter's in high school. Still in the district," he said. "Still counts." She didn't respond. Up at the clearing, the children had formed a loose circle. Eliza sat apart from the others, staring at her phone. Her fingers moved fast, scrolling through search results about Ranger. Headlines flicked by: Hero K9 disobeys to save toddler K9, forced into early retirement after controversy. Whistleblower handler speaks out. Beside her, Mia whispered, "So what did he do exactly?" Eliza turned the screen. He was in Denver's K9 unit, refused to follow an attack command during a drug bust because he found a baby under a bed. Saved the kid. Got retired for insubordination. She shook her head. Adults couldn't handle that he made the right call. Mia looked toward the fog-covered road. Well, he made another right call today. Back at the scene, red and blue lights flashed through the fog. Sheriff Nate Harrell arrived with 2 patrol cars. Nate was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with a deep voice, a thick gray mustache, and eyes like slate. He had known Sam and Mark for decades. After a quick briefing, he turned toward the device. "You sure?" Mark nodded. "Camera. Wires. No question." "I've called in state bomb techs," Nate said. "We'll get this handled." An hour passed. The perimeter grew wider. Yellow tape lined the road. Parents began arriving, alerted by frantic texts and group chats. They gathered near the clearing, anxiety etched in their brows. Rachel Caldwell, Mia's mother, stood near the edge, filming quietly with a DSLR camera slung from her neck. She was a silver-haired woman in her 40s, known around town for running a local news blog. She had a soft voice, but sharp instincts. At 8:52 a.m., 2 black trucks from the state bomb squad pulled in. Lieutenant Grace O'Hara stepped out first, slim, wiry, in a matte bomb suit. She had short red hair and green eyes that rarely blinked under pressure. She barked orders quickly, deploying a remote robot toward the bus while her team sealed off access. 30 minutes later, she gave the all-clear to Sheriff Harrell. "It's real," she confirmed. "Pressure trigger. Secondary transmitter. The camera's wireless. Someone could have been watching." It was armed. Dana swayed slightly and gripped her clipboard tighter. "Watching." "The children?" Grace nodded once. "Possibly. The angle fits." Nate turned to Sam and Mark. "We'll have to go public with this." Sam nodded grimly. But say this first, if it wasn't for that dog, we'd be telling a very different story. Mark glanced at Ranger, who now sat near the road's edge, calmly observing the quiet aftermath of the chaos he had stopped. The gray skies over Mountain View gave way to a drizzle as the sheriff's department combed through hours of security footage from the school bus depot. The walls of the operations room at the station were now lined with still images printed from grainy surveillance footage screens, flickering with time-stamped frames, each more shadowy than the last. Deputy Lisa Monroe, a tall and wiry woman in her early 30s with a sharp jawline and a quiet intensity, leaned close to the monitor. She had joined the department just 2 years prior after working for the State Patrol's Cyber Crimes Division. She was known for her meticulous eye, never rushing, never assuming. There she said, tapping the screen. Pause at 02:13 a.m. Zoom in on the southeast corner of the lot. Sheriff Nate Harrell stepped closer, squinting at the fuzzy figure in the frame. The man wore a dark hoodie, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap, but the movement was precise, intentional. He crouched low near Bus 12, the same bus that Ranger had stopped hours ago. The man reached beneath the chassis and appeared to press something into place. Then he stood, looked around, and disappeared into the shadows. Nate exhaled slowly. That's not any of our regulars. Already checked the logs, Lisa said. No one scheduled for maintenance last night. Security company confirms no alerts triggered. He knew the blind spots. Any plate not visible, but we got a clear enough shot of his face when he looked up at the dome light. She clicked a few keys, running it through facial recognition now. 15 minutes later, a name appeared on the screen. Neil Carter. Nate folded his arms. Carter. That rings a bell. Lisa clicked into the file. Former technician. Worked for Evergreen Bus Manufacturing until last year. Fired after filing multiple internal reports about structural flaws in the chassis design. Alleged the company was knowingly cutting corners. He went public, blew up a few forums, gave a podcast interview, then dropped off the radar. He worked on the same model as our bus. Lisa nodded. Model 300E. Same line, same potential defect. Nate ran a hand down his face. So he plants a fake bomb to prove a point. Maybe not so fake, Lisa said quietly, but it wasn't meant to detonate, just to scare us into looking. And Ranger stopped it from getting too far. Meanwhile, across town, Eliza sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor. The walls were plastered with hand-drawn posters of animals and science fair ribbons, and a corkboard over her desk now held a big paper cutout that read, Dog Detectives. Mia sat beside her, hunched over a tablet. This forum is weird, she muttered. Like half the users talk in codes. That's why we have Ranger, Eliza said, stroking a photo she had printed out of the German Shepherd. He gets things adults ignore. They were diving deep into old automotive safety forums, niche corners of the internet where engineers, whistleblowers, and conspiracy theorists collided. It had started with a search for evergreen bus complaints and snowballed. Wait, Eliza said. Look at this post. The screen showed a forum comment dated from 9 months ago. Username, Truth Torque. If no one listens soon, someone's going to get hurt. I won't let another school bus become a death trap. Beneath it, a reply. You're overreacting. The models passed inspection. Eliza clicked the profile. Neil Carter, she whispered. It's him. He tried to warn them. Mia leaned in, and no one listened. Eliza's eyes narrowed. We're going to make them listen now. Back at the sheriff's office, Dana Moore sat stiffly in the conference room, a paper cup of coffee untouched in front of her. She looked as though she hadn't slept, her bun slightly loosened, her blazer creased. When she'd first entered the room, her eyes avoided Ranger, who sat near the door, ever vigilant. Mark Delgado was already inside, along with Nate. A laptop sat open in front of them. The video paused on Neil's face. We know who it is, Nate said. Neil Carter. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone, but he wanted this exposed. Dana frowned. So, this was what a whistleblower stunt looks like, Mark replied. But if Ranger hadn't intervened, and if Sam hadn't taken him seriously, this would have caused mass panic. Maybe worse. It's still a crime. Dana folded her arms. What now? We find him. He's local. Used to live just outside town near Lost Hollow Road. Dana glanced toward Ranger, who now looked up at her ears forward. Something inside her softened. I want full background checks on every bus in our district, she said suddenly. Every model, every mechanic. Mark smiled faintly. Already in motion. That evening at home, Eliza uploaded her first Dog Detectives Report video to the family's YouTube channel. She wore a hoodie with Ranger's face ironed on the front. Mia filmed while Eliza explained the forum posts, the photos, and why whistleblowers like Neil Carter mattered. You don't have to be a grown-up to spot a lie, Eliza said into the camera. Sometimes you just need to listen to the one who barks the loudest when something's wrong. She ended the video with a quiet clip of Ranger licking her hand earlier that day. Then she looked into the lens. Thank you, Ranger. You saw it before any of us. The wind swept in sharp and cold from the north as dusk settled over Lost Hollow Road, turning the narrow tree-lined lane into a corridor of whispers and shadows. Deputy Mark Delgado stood with his back to the sheriff's SUV, eyes scanning the dilapidated warehouse in front of him. The structure had long since surrendered to time. Its tin roof sagged like a weary traveler, windows boarded with warped planks, ivy coiling up one side like a serpent seeking warmth. Ranger stood at his side, every muscle alert. His ears twitched at every crackle of leaves, his eyes never straying from the door that hung slightly ajar. He's in there, Mark murmured mostly to Ranger. Let's make this clean. Behind him, 2 other deputies flanked the entrance. One of them, a woman named Becca Harlan, fresh from academy training. Becca was short and broad-shouldered, with a no-nonsense glare, but her nerves betrayed her. She kept adjusting her belt and shifting her weight. Relax, Mark said softly. We want to talk, not spook him. Inside the warehouse echoed with footsteps as Neil Carter stepped into the fading light from a broken skylight. His clothes were tattered, a faded denim jacket over a grease-stained thermal shirt. He was in his late 30s, lean and gaunt, with eyes too tired for someone his age. The scruff on his jaw and dark smudges under his eyes gave the impression of a man who hadn't slept in days. He froze when Ranger growled low, then his eyes locked with Mark's as the deputy stepped into the doorway. Neil Carter. Mark said evenly, We're not here to hurt you, but we need to talk. Neil raised both hands slowly. I'm unarmed. I won't run. Mark nodded. Step outside. As Neil emerged, the waning sunlight caught the edge of a silver ring on his finger. His breath came fast but steady. Ranger remained still but alert, head low, tail stiff. You knew the kids would be on that bus, Mark said. Neil met his gaze. Yes, that's the only reason anyone paid attention. The other deputies stiffened, but Mark raised a hand to hold them back. You planted a fake bomb. Neil looked away. I knew it wouldn't go off, but I needed eyes on that chassis. I filed reports for 18 months. Nobody listened. Mark nodded slowly. You targeted the bus because you wanted to be heard, not to hurt anyone. Neil looked back at him. That's right. I was trying to save lives. Back at Mountain View Elementary, the gymnasium had transformed into a makeshift command center. Fold-out tables held laptops and extension cords. Dana Moore stood in front of a projector screen as state officials reviewed structural data sent in by independent inspectors. Her blazer was off her sleeves, rolled-up eyes bloodshot but focused. A television crew lingered by the doors. The story had already broken statewide. In the corner, Eliza sat with Mia, their laptop open and webcam streaming. A small printed sign behind them read, "Justice for Ranger." The live stream had started with a dozen viewers. Now the number climbed past 500. Eliza looked into the camera. If Ranger hadn't stopped the bus, the bomb team never would have found the flaw. Neil Carter tried to warn everyone and no one listened. Ranger did. Mia added, "He didn't just protect us, he gave Neil a voice." They shared forum posts, schematics, and quotes from former bus engineers. Comments poured in. Parents, mechanics, even a state legislator chimed in. By the time the sheriff returned with Neil Carter in the back seat of his cruiser, the crowd outside the school had swelled. Not with anger, but with questions. Dana stepped outside, faced the murmuring group, and cleared her throat. "There will be a full safety review of every school vehicle in the district," she said. "And yes, Ranger will be part of that process." Applause followed, rippling out like sunlight after a storm. Neil Carter stepped out of the cruiser, hands cuffed loosely in front. He turned to face Dana. "I never meant to frighten the children," he said. She nodded, her face softening. "I believe you. But there are better ways to be heard." Neil offered a sad smile. "Not for men like me. Not without someone like him." He looked at Ranger. Ranger padded up beside Mark and sat at attention, his gaze steady on Neil's face. Neil bowed his head. "Thank you, old boy." Ranger gave one soft bark. Nothing more, but everyone seemed to hear it. The early morning sun burned through the mist like a promise. Mountain View's crisp October air held a stillness rarely felt after a week of headlines, tension, and anxious waiting. But today, something had shifted. Inside the school district headquarters, a conference room had been converted into a press and safety briefing hub. Principal Dana Moore stood near the long rectangular window, a folder tucked under her arm, her expression thoughtful. She wore a soft burgundy sweater instead of her usual blazer, and a loose strand of her graying blonde hair curled over her cheek. Her presence, always stern and polished, felt softened not by defeat, but by clarity. Behind her, on a whiteboard, 3 red circles marked specific bus identification numbers, number 12, number 18, and number 27. In the center of the room, an independent mechanical safety expert named Dr. Rajiv Kapoor clicked through a slideshow. He was in his early 50s with a salt and pepper beard and wireframe glasses that perched precariously at the edge of his nose. Calm and methodical Rajiv had been brought in by the state board after the live stream and bomb squad report raised concerns. "Here," he said, tapping the screen, "you can clearly see the microfracture on bus number 12's chassis support beam." He clicked again, bringing up a cross-section diagram. The crack runs beneath the mounting bracket. With enough stress, a pothole, a hard brake, even rapid acceleration, it could shear clean through. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Dana's grip on the folder tightened. 3 other buses, Rajiv continued, exhibited the same structural weakness, and in all 4 cases the same model, same manufacturing batch. The failure wasn't visible during routine inspections, but it would have been detectable if someone knew where to look. He paused, or if someone smelled it. From the back of the room, Mark Delgado stepped forward with Ranger at his side. The German shepherd sat alert and proud tongue, slightly out eyes locked on Rajiv, as if he understood every word. Ranger's black and tan coat gleamed under the lights, his tail resting neatly against his paws. "Explain that last part," Dana said. Mark nodded. "We went back through camera footage from the night before the incident. Ranger had walked past the parked buses while I was finishing paperwork inside. He stopped at bus 12, sniffed the wheel well, then circled the rear bumper twice." "Are you saying he sensed the fracture?" asked Superintendent Lee Simmons, a tall woman with dark skin and a deep, resonant voice. She stood with her arms crossed, skeptical but curious. Not exactly the fracture, Mark said, but the chemical off-gassing from metal stress. Ranger's K-9 training includes detecting minute scent anomalies, explosives, accelerants, biological traces. Structural fatigue can give off a specific scent when metal fibers begin to separate under tension, especially after welding. Rajiv added, "It's rare, but in military K9 units there have been recorded instances." Dana stared at the dog. So while the rest of us were waiting for a catastrophic failure, he was already alerting. Mark looked down at Ranger and gave a small nod. He saved lives before we even knew there was danger. That afternoon in the school library, Eliza and her classmates had taken over the back table. A dog detective's HQ poster hung above a laptop where Mia typed furiously while Nolan, tall-freckled and good with numbers, ran a poll tracker from their livestream statistics. Two other students' twins named Carla and Chloe managed the TikTok page. "I can't believe it," Mia whispered. "The district just confirmed everything." "They have to do something now," Eliza said. "They already are," Nolan added. "Look at this." He clicked on an email from Principal Dana Moore addressed to all faculty and parents. Effective immediately, the ban on trained animals on school property is under review. In recognition of recent events, we are proposing a pilot initiative. Animals and Awareness, an educational partnership with the county's K9 unit to help students learn safety, empathy, and the value of service animals. Eliza's eyes lit up. "They're making it official. Ranger's going to be allowed in school." Mia grinned. "He's going to be more popular than the mascot." Later that evening in the community center auditorium, a town forum was held. Rows of chairs were filled with parents, teachers, and city officials. Ranger lay calmly near the podium, his presence now familiar, even comforting. Mark sat beside him dressed in full uniform, but it was Ranger who drew the cameras. Dana Moore approached the mic, her voice steady. "A week ago she began, I stood here skeptical of the role one retired K9 could play in our district. I stand here today to say I was wrong." The room hushed. We ask our students to be curious, to think critically, to act with courage. But when an animal does exactly that, we dismiss it because it doesn't fit our system. Ranger showed us that wisdom doesn't always speak, it sometimes barks. Chuckles and murmurs of agreement filled the room. "I've signed the order to lift the canine ban, and I've approved the Animals and Awareness pilot to begin immediately." She stepped aside as the room broke into applause. In the parking lot afterward, Eliza crouched beside Ranger and scratched behind his ears. "You're going to have your own classroom at this rate," she joked. Mark chuckled from behind. "He'll just settle for the school couch. I think he'd like to teach," Eliza said. "Maybe even help kids like me feel safer." Mark looked at her, truly looked. "You know he's not the only one who saw the truth before everyone else did." Eliza blushed and stood. "We just listened." Ranger gave a quiet bark, then licked her hand. And in the soft twilight of Mountain View, something sacred and unseen passed between them, trust earned and honored. Golden sunlight spilled across the front lawn of Mountain View Elementary, glinting off folding chairs lined in perfect rows. A small wooden stage had been constructed overnight beneath a maple tree that had begun to show the colors of early fall, burnt orange, bright yellow, crimson red. Teachers, parents, and students gathered under the warming sky, their chatter blending with the chirping of birds and the occasional flutter of paper programs. Ranger sat calmly near the edge of the platform, tongue out tail, gently sweeping the grass. His vest had been freshly cleaned, and a ribbon tied around his collar added a touch of ceremony. He didn't seem to understand the occasion, only that everyone was watching him with quiet admiration. At the back of the crowd, Sam Hutchins stood with his hands clasped in front of him. His usual ball cap was off, revealing his thinning brown hair. His eyes were red-rimmed, despite the smile tugging at his weathered face. He wore his cleanest jeans, a button-down shirt tucked neatly, a far cry from his usual bus driver uniform. "Hard to believe I ever doubted him," he muttered. Next to him, Deputy Mark Delgado gave a quiet nod. "You weren't the only one, Sam." On stage, Principal Dana Moore approached the microphone. Today she wore a forest green dress and low black heels. The lines around her eyes seemed softer now, and for once there was a warmth in her voice that students rarely heard. "Thank you, everyone, for joining us," she began. "It's not every day a town gathers to recognize a four-legged hero. But this isn't just any dog." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Ranger's actions not only prevented what could have been a catastrophic accident, but they also reminded us of something deeply human: intuition, courage, and listening to the things we don't always understand. She reached into a small box beside the podium and lifted a silver badge engraved with 3 simple words: "Guardian of the Route." A cheer erupted from the students. "Ranger," she said, "turning, you are now an official honorary guardian of our school." Mark led the German Shepherd forward. Ranger paused, looked up at the crowd, then sat like a statue of loyalty itself. Dana knelt to clip the badge onto his vest. "There we go, boy," she whispered. "You've earned it." Applause thundered. Several younger students waved hand-drawn signs. "Ranger for President, best dog ever. And thank you, Ranger." As the crowd settled, Dana stepped aside and motioned toward Sam. "Mr. Hutchins has asked to say a few words." Sam climbed the steps slowly, each footfall heavier than the last. He paused at the mic, looking down at Ranger, who had now taken his seat beside the podium. "I've driven the morning route for 22 years. Sam began, his voice low and gravelly. "I thought I'd seen it all: snowstorms, flat tires, squirrel invasions. But nothing prepared me for the day this dog jumped in front of my bus." The crowd chuckled. "I thought he was just another stray. I was wrong." His voice cracked. He wasn't lost. He was exactly where he needed to be. He cleared his throat, eyes glistening. "I owe you one, buddy. We all do." There was no clapping, just a collective silence, the kind born from shared emotion. Then a single hand clapped from the back. It was Neil Carter. The crowd turned as he approached the stage. He wore a county-issued reflective vest and jeans stained with fresh paint from the community center wall he'd been repainting all morning. "I didn't come to speak," he said quietly, standing at the base of the stage. "But I'd like to thank you for listening, for understanding that what I did came from desperation, not malice." Dana stepped forward and addressed the crowd. After careful review and in light of Mr. Carter's transparency and the critical information he provided the district, along with the county, has agreed not to pursue criminal charges. A few murmurs rose, but were quickly hushed. However, she added, Mr. Carter will complete 200 hours of supervised community service. Neil nodded, accepting the judgment. Fair. Then Eliza stepped forward, a stack of note cards trembling slightly in her hand. She wore a navy blue dress and her hair in a tight ponytail. Ranger looked up at her as she passed, tail thumping once. "Hi," she said into the mic, voice shaky. "My name is Eliza Hutchins, and I guess I'm part of the reason we're all here." A few students clapped encouragingly. "I used to think that if you're a kid, no one listens, that adults have all the power. But then I met Ranger and I realized sometimes grown-ups forget how to pay attention." She took a breath. Ranger didn't speak. He barked. He stood in the way. He made people look when they didn't want to. And he reminded us that being heard is not always about being loud, it's about being right. Murmurs of agreement swept the crowd. We need to listen better to each other, to the people we dismiss, to the instincts we ignore. Ranger is a hero, yes, but he's also a messenger. Of trust, of warning, of second chances. She looked toward Neil. Even for people like Mr. Carter. The audience erupted in applause, and someone from the back shouted, "You tell him, Eliza." That evening, clips from the ceremony, including Eliza's speech, were posted online by a local news crew. Within 48 hours, it had over 200,000 views. Parents from other towns began calling for their own school districts to adopt similar programs. The phrase, "guardian of the root," trended on social media for a brief, hopeful spell. The first snow came earlier than expected that year in Mountain View. A soft powder coated the sidewalks and rooftops like a hush falling over the town. Holiday decorations twinkled in store windows, and the scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air as winter tiptoed across Vermont. Yet, even beneath the cold, something warm stirred in the heart of the schoolyard where a bronze plaque recently installed at the base of the flagpole shimmered in the pale morning sun. It read, "In honor of Ranger Guardian of the Root, Listener of Silences, Protector of Futures." Ranger sat beside the plaque, his eyes half closed in contentment, watching the children of Mountain View Elementary dart around the playground. He was no longer just a visitor. He was home. Over the past month, the German Shepherd had become a beloved figure on campus. His coat, thick and well-brushed, glowed under winter's light. His gait had a noble steadiness. Now he walked with purpose, but also with peace. Children high-fived him on their way into school. Parents sent homemade dog treats in their kids' lunchboxes. And every Wednesday morning, Ranger was walked through each classroom during awareness hour, a tradition Principal Dana Moore had introduced as part of the new Animals and Awareness initiative. Dana stood near the office window that day, a fresh mug of peppermint tea warming her hands. Her crisp navy suit was softened by a cream-colored scarf wrapped around her neck. A gentle smile played on her lips as she watched Eliza in the courtyard, helping first graders make snow angels. Dana's face, once lined with caution and bureaucracy, now held the lightness of someone who had let the world in and been changed by it. Inside her office, a large printed certificate framed in oak hung proudly. State Grant Recipient, Animal Interaction and Learning Center, to be built. Spring 2026, inspired by the story of Ranger. Dana turned when she heard a knock. It was Sam Hutchins. His coat was zipped to the neck, his breath fogging in the doorway. He carried a small brown box in one hand and a ring of keys in the other. "Ready?" Dana asked, her voice gentle. Sam gave a nod. 30 years on the road. Feels like yesterday when I picked up my first set of twins, those Miller boys who used to glue their hands to the seat." She laughed. "You've done more than drive, Sam. You've protected, guided, watched kids grow up, some into teachers now themselves." Sam stepped in and placed the keys on her desk. "It's time. I've trained Micah. He's a good kid. Sharp eyes. And he listens. Reminds me of me, just with fewer backaches." Dana chuckled. "What's in the box?" Sam opened it to reveal a small metal tag on a collar, bent and worn, the edges dulled with age. "This belonged to my first bus. BSW 01. Thought it might make a nice addition to the new center." Dana's eyes welled. "Thank you, Sam." Outside, Eliza stood beneath the oak tree where it had all begun. Her cheeks were pink with cold, but her eyes sparkled with the kind of joy only children can carry unburdened. She had changed, more open, more curious. The quiet watchfulness that once shadowed her had lifted since the day Ranger stepped in front of her bus. Therapy sessions had helped, yes, but it was Ranger who sat beside her during the hardest talks, who never flinched when she cried, who nudged her with his nose when words failed. Mia, Chloe, and Nolan approached with a banner rolled under Mia's arm. "We printed it," Nolan said, unrolling the long vinyl sheet. It read, "Ranger's Corner, where listening begins." Eliza smiled. "He's earned it." That afternoon, a small ceremony was held behind the library, where construction markers now staked out the land for the new Animal Interaction and Learning Center. Dana gave a brief speech. Eliza read a short poem titled "What the Silence Said." And Ranger, faithful as ever, lay beneath the tree, his eyes watching the sky. Before the crowd left, someone called out, "Where's Sam?" All heads turned toward the old yellow school bus parked nearby, bus 12 now retired. Its paint had faded and its tires were gone, but it had been lovingly preserved under a clear canopy as a tribute. There, standing at the steps, Sam raised one hand in farewell. His eyes glistened with something unsaid, something too big for words. Ranger stood and padded over, sat beside him, and rested his head gently against Sam's leg. A final goodbye. A beginning, not just an end. Later that week, a journalist from a national paper published a feature titled "The Dog Who Taught a Town to Listen." The story swept across social media. Teachers in Oregon, Kentucky, and Minnesota reached out to Dana about implementing similar animal-integrated programs. Ranger's paw print ink-stamped by one of the kindergartners was shared more than 80,000 times online. Eliza's video essay about the experience won first place in the statewide Voices of the Future competition. In her closing line, she said, "Sometimes the ones who warn us don't use words. They use eyes, silence, loyalty, and the courage to stand in the road when the rest of us just keep driving. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or angels from the sky. Sometimes they arrive as a quiet dog stepping out of the fog with steady eyes and the courage to stand between danger and those who can't defend themselves." Ranger didn't just stop a school bus, he stopped time. He made a town look at what it had tried to ignore. Perhaps that was God's way of reminding us to listen not just with our ears, but with our hearts. In everyday life, we often miss the quiet signs: a child's hesitation, a friend's silence, a stranger's quiet warning. But if we slow down, we may hear the gentle whisper of grace calling us back to compassion. Ranger was more than a dog. He was a message, a guardian, a miracle sent in the most unexpected form. If this story touched you, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Leave a comment with the word Amen if you believe God sends protectors when we need them most. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories where faith, courage, and love show up in the most surprising ways. May God bless you and all who choose to listen when others cannot speak.